Have you ever looked at a car and thought, that shouldn't be fast? And yet it was. A strange car, badly proportioned, ugly even. A car that, visually, doesn't command respect. It doesn't promise speed. It doesn't look dangerous. And yet, when it accelerated, it left behind machines that were far more beautiful, more admired, and, at least on paper, far more sporty. During the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Detroit didn't just build beautiful cars. It also created true monsters hidden inside awkward, exaggerated, or downright hard-to-look-at bodies. Cars that looked like design mistakes. Cars that divided opinions. Cars many people were almost embarrassed to admit they liked. But they all shared one thing. They were far faster than their appearance ever suggested. Buckle up, because some of the most uncomfortable cars to look at were absolute rockets on wheels. 1963 to 1964. Pontiac Tempest. If someone showed you this car with no context, you would never think of speed. The early 1960s. Tempest looks almost fragile. Odd proportions, timid design, a silhouette that neither commands respect nor intimidates anyone. To many, it was simply strange. To others, outright ugly. It didn't have the presence of a muscle car. It didn't have aggressive lines. It didn't look built to go fast. And that's exactly why it fooled almost everyone. Pontiac created the Tempest as a technical experiment. It featured unconventional solutions for its time, including a unique layout and a lighter overall approach than most American cars. Visually, that translated into a car that looked smaller, weaker, and less serious than its rivals. But beneath that awkward appearance, there was a surprise. In its most powerful versions, the Tempest could be equipped with a V8, producing over 300 horsepower, an absolutely unexpected figure for a car that looked like this in the early 1960s. It wasn't a car that shouted performance with its looks. It was a car that attacked when no one saw it coming. In a straight line, it could accelerate hard enough to embarrass cars that were bigger, prettier, and far more respected. And that created a very specific feeling. The feeling of having been fooled by appearances. The public never fully understood it. Between 1963 and 1964, the Pontiac Tempest was produced in relatively modest numbers, especially in its higher performance configurations. It wasn't a bestseller, and it was never an instant icon. For many buyers, it was too strange to love and too ugly to desire. Today, that same strangeness is its greatest appeal. The Tempest is one of the clearest examples of what this video is about. A car that didn't look fast, but had no problem proving the opposite. It didn't intimidate. It didn't show off. It just accelerated. And it did so far better than anyone expected. 1966 to 1969. Chevrolet Biscayne 427. This car is almost offensively boring to look at. The Biscayne wasn't designed to be liked. It was designed to function. Simple lines, a complete absence of ornamentation, and a silhouette that seemed built to disappear into traffic. It didn't look fast. It didn't look special. It didn't look dangerous. And that's exactly what made it the perfect car to fool anyone. During the second half of the 1960s, while Chevrolet was flooding the streets with flashy muscle cars, it quietly allowed something completely out of place, installing one of its most serious engines into the most basic sedan in its lineup. Under that utterly anonymous design, the Biscayne could be fitted with a 427 V8, a big block capable of producing over 425 horsepower, a brutal figure even by today's standards, and almost absurd for a car that looked like it was meant to carry families or government workers, not launch itself down the road. In a straight line, the contrast was immediate. The Biscayne gave no warning. It didn't look aggressive. It simply took off. 0 to 60 miles per hour happened in roughly 5.5 to 6 seconds, putting it on par with far more famous muscle cars. But with one crucial difference: no one expected it. While other cars screamed performance through their styling, the Biscayne hid it completely, and that made it especially unsettling, because from the outside, it looked slow. From the inside, it felt brutal, heavy, yes, but pushed forward by a force that had no right to be there. It wasn't a car looking for applause. It was a car that won without being noticed. Today, the Biscayne 427 is considered one of the most extreme sleepers of the classic American era. Not because of its looks, but because of the contradiction it represents. One of Chevrolet's most violent engines installed in one of the most visually irrelevant cars the brand ever produced. Ugly, anonymous, ridiculously fast. Exactly the kind of car that defines this video. 1968 to 1969. AMC AMX 390. This car looked fast, but it didn't look right. The AMX always felt badly proportioned, too short, too wide, with an odd profile that broke every visual rule of a classic muscle car. To many people, it was simply ugly, uncomfortable to look at, as if someone had shrunk a powerful car without thinking too much about the result. And yet, the moment it accelerated, everything made sense. Unlike longer, more stable muscle cars, the AMX had an extremely short wheelbase, visually awkward, but mechanically aggressive. Every stab of the throttle felt immediate, almost violent, like the car wanted to rip itself off the pavement. With the 390 V8, the AMX produced over 315 horsepower, but the shocking part wasn't the number. It was how that power arrived. The car reacted without filters, without smoothness, with no intention of being polite. 0 to 60 miles per hour came in just over 6 seconds, but the sensation was more intense than in many more powerful rivals. The relatively light weight and short chassis made acceleration feel nervous, almost dangerous. It wasn't a car that inspired confidence. It was a car that demanded respect. At high speeds, the AMX didn't feel elegant. It felt tense, raw, direct. And that made a lot of people uncomfortable. While other muscle cars mix power with heroic styling, the AMX felt like an unfinished experiment. It didn't have the beauty of a Camaro or the charisma of a Mustang. It had character, and too much of it. Today, that visual discomfort is part of its charm. The AMX perfectly represents this category. Cars that didn't look fast in the right way, but in reality could accelerate with a brutality that shattered any aesthetic prejudice. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't refined, but when it launched forward, no one doubted what it could do. 1970 AMC Rebel Machine. This car didn't try to hide anything. The Rebel Machine was ugly on purpose. Violent colors, over-the-top graphics, an aesthetic so aggressive it bordered on caricature. Even in an era when muscle cars screamed for attention, the Rebel felt like too much. Too red, too blue, too graphic, too uncomfortable. To many people, it was simply tasteless. And yet, behind that almost childish design, there was a very serious problem. AMC didn't create the Rebel Machine as a styling exercise. It created it as a statement. Beneath that loud exterior lived a 390 V8, producing over 340 horsepower, numbers that placed it squarely among the fastest muscle cars of its time. In acceleration, there was nothing playful about it. 0 to 60 miles per hour happened in around 6 seconds, delivered with a brutality that felt almost absurd compared to its appearance. It was genuinely fast, direct, unrefined. What made it unsettling was the contrast. From the outside, it looked like an exaggerated show car. From the inside, it felt like a serious, heavy, hard-hitting machine. Every acceleration shoved you forward, reminding you that this wasn't an aesthetic joke. It was a real muscle car. The Rebel Machine was never elegant. It never wanted to be. While other brands tried to balance style and performance, AMC embraced visual excess and backed it up with real numbers. The result was a car many rejected for its looks, but no one could ignore once it started moving. Today, it remains one of those cars that triggers extreme reactions. Some consider it one of the ugliest muscle cars ever made. Others respect it precisely because, behind that questionable styling, there was real speed and unfiltered character. The Rebel Machine proved something very clear. Sometimes ugly design isn't a mistake, it's a warning, and what comes next changes the tone completely. Because the next car wasn't exaggerated or aggressive. It was serious, conservative, and visually boring. 1961 Chrysler 300. This car didn't look fast. It looked important. The early 1960s, Chrysler 300 had a heavy, almost bureaucratic presence. Straight lines, massive proportions, and a design that communicated authority, not adrenaline. It was the kind of car associated with executives, long trips, and silence. not violent acceleration. To many people, it was simply boring, too serious, too proper. And that's where the deception lived, because behind that conservative appearance, Chrysler hid one of the most serious mechanical packages of its era. Under the hood, the 300 could be equipped with V8s producing well over 370 horsepower, numbers that, in the early 1960s, placed it among the fastest production cars in America. On the road, the contrast was unsettling. The Chrysler didn't shout, it didn't shake, it didn't seem to struggle. It simply accelerated with quiet authority. 0 to 60 miles per hour came in roughly 6 seconds. Hard to believe for a car that looked far more concerned with comfort than speed. While other performance cars delivered noise and drama, the 300 moved forward with an eerie calm. And that made it even stranger. It wasn't a car chasing excitement. It was a car that imposed pace. At high speeds, it felt stable, planted, and shockingly fast for something so large and visually unexciting. It was the kind of car that made you go much faster than you realized, without warning you. It wasn't ugly in the traditional sense. It was ugly through sobriety, through excessive formality. But when it came to performance, it was miles ahead of cars that looked far more exciting and desirable. And that makes it one of the most fascinating contradictions on this list. A car that looked slow, that looked heavy, and that, in reality, was dangerously fast. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. This car didn't look fast. It looked like a mistake. The Daytona was so visually extreme that even in 1969, many people thought it was outright ridiculous. A cone-shaped extended nose, a massive raised rear wing, and a silhouette that looked more like a wind tunnel prototype than a street car. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't balanced. It wasn't pretty. It was uncomfortable to look at. But all that excess had one very clear purpose: absolute speed. Dodge didn't design the Daytona to please the public. It designed it to win. Every inch of its bodywork was shaped to reduce drag and increase stability at speeds other production cars simply couldn't handle. And it worked. With V8 engines producing over 425 horsepower, the Daytona wasn't just quick off the line. It was terrifying at high speed. It became the first production-based car to break 200 miles per hour, a number that still commands respect even today. What was unsettling wasn't only the top speed, it was how it felt. While other muscle cars started to feel nervous as speeds climbed, the Daytona planted itself to the pavement with almost unnatural confidence. The extended nose sliced through the air. The huge rear wing kept the back end glued down. The car felt engineered to go fast, all the time. Visually, that made it a total anomaly. It looked like too much, exaggerated, out of proportion. But every one of those ugly decisions had a clear function. The Daytona wasn't ugly by accident. It was ugly because of technical obsession. On the street, most people didn't know what they were looking at. On the track, no one could ignore it. Today, the Charger Daytona is one of the most divisive American cars ever made. To some, a styling disaster. To others, a functional masterpiece. But one thing is undeniable. It was so fast that it forced the rulebook to change. A car so ugly that it became too fast even for its own era. 1963, Studebaker Avanti R2. This car looked like it came from another planet. The Avanti didn't fit into Detroit. It didn't follow the rules. It ignored classic proportions. It had no excessive chrome and no muscular lines. To many people, it was simply ugly. Too strange, too different. In an era dominated by tail fins, massive grills, and aggressive styling, the Avanti felt almost European, low, smooth, with no traditional front grille and a silhouette that confused buyers and dealers alike. But the truly disturbing part wasn't the design. It was what happened when it accelerated. In R2 form, the Avanti hit a supercharged V8 producing around 290 horsepower. That number may not sound outrageous compared to later big block monsters, but context changes everything. The Avanti was lighter, more aerodynamic, and far more efficient at high speed than most of its rivals. The result was unsettling. 0 to 60 miles per hour came in around 7 seconds, but the real shock came afterward. While many muscle cars began to run out of breath, the Avanti just kept pulling with an almost unnatural ease. At high speeds, it was one of the fastest production cars in the world at the time. And it did all that without looking fast. It didn't shout visually. It didn't intimidate. It didn't promise anything. From the outside, It looked like a strange design experiment. From the driver's seat, it felt precise, stable, and dangerously quick. The Avanti wasn't rejected for being slow. It was rejected for not looking American. Today, that same weirdness makes it one of the most fascinating cars of its era, not just because it was fast, but because it represented a completely different approach to performance. Less visual muscle, more real efficiency. 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner Superbird. This car didn't look real. It looked like a cartoon brought to life. To many people, the Superbird is one of the ugliest cars ever produced in the United States. An endless nose, a gigantic raised rear wing, and proportions so extreme they felt almost offensive to anyone expecting a normal muscle car. Even today, it triggers instant reactions. Either you love it, or you can't believe someone approved its design. But once again, the ugliness had a purpose. The Superbird wasn't born to be liked. It was born to be fast, and it was fast in an almost obscene way. Under that absurd bodywork, Plymouth installed V8 engines producing over 425 horsepower, including the legendary 426 Hemi. But beyond raw power, what truly made the Superbird special was its aerodynamic efficiency. Every strange shape existed for one reason: keeping the car stable at speeds most rivals couldn't even approach. In real-world terms, the Superbird could exceed 190 miles per hour, placing it in a completely different league from traditional muscle cars. In a straight line, it was brutal. At high speed, it was relentless. While other cars fought the air, the Superbird cut straight through it, and it did all of that. Looking like this. That was too much for the public. Many dealers didn't know how to sell it. Many buyers didn't want to be associated with something so strange. And the result was a car misunderstood from day one. But time has a strange way of settling scores. Today, the Superbird is seen as one of the most extreme machines ever legalized for the street, not because of its beauty, but because of its brutal honesty. Every absurd line exists for a reason. Every exaggerated element serves a single obsession: going faster than anyone else. The Superbird is the perfect definition of this video. Ugly, exaggerated, ridiculous to some, and yet, a genuine rocket on wheels. After seeing all these cars, one thing becomes very clear. Speed doesn't always come wrapped in beauty. Very often, it arrives disguised as design mistakes, awkward proportions, and decisions that made everyone uncomfortable, except the stopwatch. Now, I want your opinion. Which of these ugly cars surprised you the most with its speed? The one that looked fragile? The one that looked boring? Or the one that looked downright absurd? Leave it in the comments, because every answer says a lot about how we understand passion for classic cars. And if you enjoyed this journey through the most uncomfortable contradictions of American automotive history, check out the video on screen. There we dive into the rarest classic pickups of the 1950s and 1960s, trucks nobody understood, ideas ahead of their time, strange machines that have become true hidden legends. Click and keep traveling with us through the strangest, most misunderstood, and most fascinating side of American automotive history. See you in the next video.